Hi, this is just a quick video explaining how to answer question 3C on the Weimar and Nazi Germany history exam paper. As you can see here in the overall overview slide, just like for question 3B, question 3C is an interpretations question. Again, it's worth 4 marks. We ask you to do slightly different things. So again, just like in question 3B, make sure you're remembering to look at the interpretations and not the sources, at least for the main focus of this question. Okay, so let's have a look at question 3C. So question 3C, rather than asking you about what is different between those two interpretations, it asks you to suggest one reason why interpretations 1 and 2 give different views about the topic that the question is about. It also says you may use sources B and C to help explain your answer. So it's important that you're focusing mainly on interpretations 1 and 2, but you can also use those sources to back up what you're saying, and I'll explain that in just a second. So essentially the point of this question then is giving one reason to explain why interpretations 1 and 2 do different views. In question 3B, we've established what's different between them. This one's establishing a reason for that. Hopefully you can see on the screen there that there are a few valid reasons that you can give. There's one there that you can see is clearly indicated in bold and underlined. That's the one that is by far the most straightforward to get the marks for. So that's the way I would strongly encourage you to answer this question. And that's the example we've given here, is using that particular reason. And you can see that one of those valid reasons, one that's nice and straightforward to explain, is that they might give different weight to different sources. That means they may have used different sources, they've paid more attention to one source or another. They've used, why would they have different views about a particular issue? Because they've used different sources of information. That's the reason. And if we use that method, we can back it up quite nicely and hopefully guarantee us the 4 marks if we use that. And you can see how we do that underneath. There's an example of how you go about answering this. Now you can do this by matching up the interpretations to the source which kind of corresponds. As you can see in the question, it says you may use sources B and C to help explain your answer. So that's what we're going to do. Usually, each of the interpretations does kind of correspond, does kind of match up to one of the sources. It's often the case that sometimes really obviously, sometimes slightly more subtly, but those sources do kind of tie up one to each of those interpretations. And so that's what we can do. And if you look down the bottom, I think probably the best way to look at how to do this is to see kind of example of how to write an answer. So it says the interpretations may have used different sources. There's your reason given. So that's why they're different. They're different because they've used different sources. For example, interpretation 1 may have used sources like source B. These are also examples that highlight, and you've got this blank there, because you have to show, what is it that source, in this case source B and interpretation 1, kind of have in common. What is it that they both emphasize? Why is it they link together? And then whereas interpretation 2 may have used sources like source C that emphasize something different. Now, of course, you would have already identified what the views are in interpretation 1 and 2 in question 3B. So it's really just finding the source which matches that view and explaining that. Now, the example you guys had in your formative assessment book using the 2019 paper, which is all about women in Nazi Germany, I think in that one, interpretation 1 suggested the Nazis didn't really have very much success in their policies towards women. They didn't really change what women were doing very much, whereas interpretation 2 suggested that actually the Nazis were quite successful and the women did change their behaviour. When you look at the sources, the first of the sources, source B, was Goebbels explaining his views and telling women to stay at home and have lots of children. So that actually matched up with interpretation 2, suggesting that women did stay at home and have lots of children. The second source, source C, was a picture of women working in a factory, which of course ties in with interpretation 1, which was all about women staying in work and not giving up their jobs. So hopefully you can see how they would match up. And you need to just explain what the main views are. So if we can manage to do that, if you remember how to approach this, this would apply to most most questions that we've seen, this would apply to and this would work for. So you're likely to be able to use this approach in your real exam. So if you remember the approach, it should be one you can roll out in any of these questions that we get. So it's remembering to match up the interpretation to the source, but also explain what they highlight. So in the example I gave, you might say interpretation 1, I may have used sources like source C, which highlight women stayed in work and didn't give up their jobs. Therefore, the Nazi policies weren't successful. You're just showing what they highlight. Okay, hopefully that's nice and clear. Remember, it's only 4 marks, so you don't need to spend too long on it. It's just matching up the interpretation to the source and explaining what it is they both highlight. Okay, thank you very much.